royal morning. The sun rose over London on that historic Saturday morning, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold. Inside Kensington Palace, the Wales family was already awake despite the early hour. The coronation of King Charles III was just hours away, and every member of the household felt the weight and wonder of the occasion. Prince William stood by the window of his private chamber, watching the city slowly come to life. He had barely slept. His mind kept returning to the ceremony ahead, to his father who would soon wear the crown, and to his own children who would witness history being made. The responsibility felt enormous. Today was not just about his father becoming king. It was about showing the world that the monarchy could move forward with grace and dignity. In another part of the palace, Catherine was already dressed in a simple robe, her hair being carefully styled by her trusted hairdresser. She sat very still, her face calm and composed, but her hands occasionally fidgeted with the fabric of her robe. She had been preparing for this day for weeks, choosing every detail of her outfit with care. The dress, the jewelry, the shoes, everything had to be perfect. But more than that, she knew the cameras would be on her children, and she wanted to make sure they felt confident and comfortable. Prince George, the eldest at 9 years old, was in his room with his valet, being fitted into his formal attire. He had been told many times about the importance of this day. He would be a page of honor, carrying part of his grandfather's robe during the ceremony. The responsibility made him nervous, but he tried not to show it. He stood straight and still as the buttons were fastened, his young face serious and focused. Princess Charlotte, 7 years old, was more excited than nervous. She loved special occasions, loved dressing up, and this was the most special day she could imagine. Her governess helped her into her beautiful white dress, and Charlotte kept looking at herself in the mirror, spinning around to watch the fabric move. Her mother had told her to be on her best behavior, to walk slowly and gracefully, and Charlotte was determined to do exactly that. Little Prince Louis, only 5 years old, was finding it harder to sit still. He kept asking questions. Why did they have to go so early? Why was everyone so serious? Could he bring his toy car? His nanny patiently answered each question while helping him dress, gently reminding him that today was very important and he needed to be a good boy. Louis nodded, trying to understand, but his eyes kept darting to the window where he could see people gathering outside the palace gates. The palace was a hive of quiet activity. Staff members moved through the corridors with purpose, checking lists, making final arrangements, ensuring nothing was forgotten. The security team had been working since before dawn, going over every detail of the route to Westminster Abbey. Nothing could be left to chance. The eyes of the world would be watching. Catherine finished getting ready and went to check on the children. She found Charlotte twirling in front of a mirror and couldn't help but smile. Her daughter looked absolutely beautiful and so happy. Catherine knelt down beside her and adjusted a ribbon in Charlotte's hair, whispering words of encouragement. She then went to George's room and found him standing stiffly, looking uncomfortable in his formal clothes. She sat with him for a few minutes, talking quietly, reminding him that he would do wonderfully and that his grandfather was so proud of him. When she reached Louis's room, she found him jumping on his bed while his nanny tried desperately to keep his clothes neat. Catherine gave her son a look and Louis immediately stopped, scrambling down with an apologetic grin. She couldn't be too strict with him. He was still so young, and this was asking a lot of a 5-year-old. She hugged him close and told him that today would be amazing, that he would see things he had never seen before, and that she was right there with him. William joined his family in the main drawing room. He looked distinguished in his formal military uniform, every medal and insignia perfectly placed. When he saw Catherine, now dressed in her coronation outfit, he paused. She looked magnificent. The cream and silver dress was elegant and regal, the headpiece subtle but striking. She caught his eye and gave him a small, reassuring smile. They had been through so much together, and today they would face another historic moment as a team. The children gathered around their parents. George looked serious and determined. Charlotte was beaming with excitement, and Louis was bouncing on his toes, barely containing his energy. Catherine and William looked at their children with a mixture of pride and concern. They wanted this day to be special for them, but they also knew how overwhelming it could be. A palace official appeared at the door and quietly announced that the cars were ready. It was time to leave. William took a deep breath and nodded. Catherine gathered the children, making sure each one looked perfect. She straightened George's collar one more time, smoothed down Charlotte's dress, and tucked Louis's shirt in properly. Then she stood back and looked at her family. They were ready. As they walked through the palace corridors toward the entrance, staff members paused in their work to watch them pass. Some smiled, some gave small bows, all of them aware that they were watching history in motion. The family moved together, a unit, each member aware of their role and their importance. Outside, the noise of the gathered crowds could be heard even through the thick palace walls. Thousands of people had lined the streets since the night before, camping out to secure the best viewing spots. Flags waved, cameras flashed, and a buzz of excitement filled the air. Everyone wanted to be part of this moment, to witness the crowning of a new king and to see the royal family on this most significant of days. The cars waited in the courtyard, gleaming and ready. Security personnel stood at attention, their faces impassive but their eyes constantly scanning for any potential threat. The driver opened the door and William helped his family inside. George climbed in carefully, trying not to wrinkle his clothes. Charlotte followed, still smiling. Louis scrambled in last and Catherine entered after them, arranging everyone comfortably. William was the last to enter. Before he did, he glanced back at the palace, at the building that had been his home for so many years. Today marked a new chapter for his family, for the monarchy, and for Britain itself. He felt the weight of history on his shoulders, but also a sense of purpose. He climbed into the car and settled beside Catherine. She reached over and took his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. The convoy began to move, slowly at first, through the palace gates and onto the London streets. The roar of the crowd hit them immediately. People were everywhere, pressed against barriers, waving frantically, calling out names, taking pictures. The children pressed their faces to the windows, amazed by the sheer number of people. Louis waved enthusiastically and Charlotte joined in, her earlier nervousness forgotten in the excitement of the moment. Catherine kept a watchful eye on all three children, while maintaining her own composed smile and wave. She knew the cameras were on them, broadcasting their journey to millions of people around the world. Every gesture, every expression would be analyzed and discussed. But in this moment, sitting with her family heading toward Westminster Abbey, she felt a strange sense of calm. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The journey to the Abbey seemed to take forever and no time at all. The streets were a blur of faces, flags, and flashing cameras. Inside the car, the family sat quietly, each lost in their own thoughts. William thought about his father, about the moment when the crown would be placed on his head. George rehearsed in his mind the steps he would need to take during the ceremony. Charlotte wondered if she would get to see the queen consort's crown up close. And Louis, true to his nature, was simply taking it all in, his eyes wide with wonder. Arrival at the Abbey. Westminster Abbey rose before them like a magnificent monument to history. The ancient stone walls had witnessed countless coronations over the centuries, and today they would witness another. The convoy slowed as it approached the entrance, and the noise from the crowd reached a crescendo. Tens of thousands of people had gathered around the Abbey, their cheers echoing off the historic buildings. Inside the car, William straightened his uniform one final time. Catherine checked the children, smoothing down collars and adjusting ribbons. George took a deep breath, trying to calm the butterflies in his stomach. Charlotte squeezed her mother's hand, her excitement mixed with a touch of nervousness now that they had arrived. Louis pressed his face against the window, trying to see everything at once. The car came to a gentle stop at the entrance designated for the royal family. Security personnel immediately surrounded the vehicle, their eyes scanning the crowd constantly. The door opened and the roar of the crowd intensified. Cameras clicked rapidly, capturing every moment. This was what everyone had been waiting for, the arrival of the Prince and Princess of Wales and their children. William stepped out first, his military bearing making him look every inch the future king. He turned and offered his hand to Catherine, who emerged with perfect grace. The crowd gasped at her appearance. Her dress caught the light beautifully, and her headpiece added an elegant touch to her ensemble. She smiled at the crowd, that warm, genuine smile that had endeared her to millions, and waved gently. George was next, stepping out carefully, mindful of his role as page. He looked small in his formal attire, but he held himself with dignity beyond his years. Charlotte followed, and the crowd audibly cooed at how adorable she looked. She gave a small wave, remembering everything her mother had taught her about greeting people. Louis came last, helped by his father, and his appearance brought smiles to thousands of faces. He looked around with wide eyes, overwhelmed by the spectacle. The family paused for a moment at the entrance, allowing the photographers to capture the scene. This image would be on the front page of newspapers around the world tomorrow. William and Catherine stood together, their children arranged around them, a picture of unity and grace. Then, with a nod from William, they began to move toward the Abbey entrance. The walk from the car to the Abbey doors felt incredibly long. Every step was scrutinized, every expression noted. Charlotte remembered to keep her head up and her shoulders back, just as her governess had taught her. George walked with measured steps, trying to match his father's pace. Louis held Catherine's hand tightly, his earlier excitement tempered by the sheer magnitude of the event. As they approached the entrance, they could see other members of the royal family and dignitaries arriving. Heads of state from around the world were converging on this ancient building, all coming to witness the coronation. The Abbey staff waited at the entrance, ready to guide the family to their places. Everything had been rehearsed dozens of times, but today it had to be perfect. They crossed the threshold into the Abbey, and the atmosphere changed immediately. Outside had been noise and chaos, energy and excitement. Inside was cool, quiet, and reverent. The ancient stone walls seemed to absorb sound, creating a sense of timelessness. Centuries of history hung in the air, and everyone who entered felt it. The children's eyes widened as they took in the interior of the Abbey. They had been here before for rehearsals, but today it looked different. Flowers were everywhere, elaborate arrangements in white and gold. The pews were filled with guests in their finest attire. The lighting was carefully arranged to create the right atmosphere for the television cameras that would broadcast the ceremony to billions of viewers worldwide. An usher approached and quietly guided them to their designated area. They would wait here until it was time for the processional to begin. Other royal family members were already assembled, each in their assigned place. There were smiles and nods of greeting, but conversation was kept to a minimum. Everyone understood the solemnity of the occasion. William exchanged a look with his brother Harry, who had arrived earlier with his family. Despite the tensions and difficulties of recent years, today was about their father, and both brothers were determined to be present and supportive. Harry gave a small nod and William returned it. Some things were bigger than personal conflicts. Catherine kept the children close, making sure they were comfortable while they waited. George was standing very straight, his young face serious. She could see the tension in his shoulders and gently touched his arm, offering silent reassurance. Charlotte was looking around at everything, taking mental notes of all the details she would want to remember later. Louis was fidgeting slightly, and Catherine quietly reminded him to stay still. The Abbey continued to fill with guests. Prime ministers, presidents, kings and queens from other nations, all taking their seats. The diplomatic effort that had gone into coordinating this event had been enormous. Seating arrangements alone had taken months of careful negotiation. Every guest had been placed with consideration for protocol, relationships, and centuries of tradition. Music began to play, the organ filling the vast space with rich, majestic sound. The Abbey choir, world-renowned for their talent, began to sing. The music was carefully chosen, a mixture of traditional hymns and new compositions created specifically for this coronation. Every note resonated with history and hope, past and future coming together in harmony. William felt his heart rate increase. The ceremony was about to begin. Soon the procession would start, and they would all walk down that long aisle to their seats. His father would follow, making his own entrance as the king to be crowned. This was really happening. After years of waiting, of preparing, his father was about to become king, and William himself was one step closer to the throne. Catherine sensed her husband's tension and discreetly took his hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. They had supported each other through so many challenges over the years. This was just another one, albeit perhaps the most significant yet. They would get through it together as they always did. She glanced at their children and felt a surge of pride. They were handling this so well. George heard the music and knew it was almost time. He had practiced his role so many times, but now that the moment was here, he felt nervous again. What if he tripped? What if he dropped something? His mother had told him that even if something went wrong, He should just keep going, stay calm, and do his best. He repeated those words to himself now, trying to find courage in them. Charlotte was less nervous than excited. She loved the music, loved the beautiful decorations, loved the sense that something very special was happening. She knew she had to be good, had to walk properly and sit still, but she was confident she could do it. Her mother had prepared her well, and she wanted to make her family proud. Louis was finding it harder to understand what was happening. He knew it was important, everyone had told him that, but he didn't really grasp why. He just knew he had to be quiet and do what his parents told him. He held onto his mother's hand more tightly, drawing comfort from her presence. As long as she was there, he felt safe, even in this strange and overwhelming situation. An official approached William and quietly informed him that it was time. The processional would begin in 2 minutes. William nodded and turned to his family. Catherine was already gathering the children, making final adjustments to their appearance. George straightened his shoulders. Charlotte smoothed down her dress. Louis looked up at his parents, waiting for instruction. They formed up in the correct order as they had practiced. William and Catherine would lead, with the children following in age order. Palace staff made final checks, ensuring everything was perfect. One of them whispered good luck, and William gave a grateful nod. The music changed, becoming more formal and processional. This was the signal. They began to move forward, stepping into the aisle that led to the front of the abbey. The congregation rose to their feet as they appeared. Cameras turned to focus on them. Television commentators began describing the scene to millions of viewers. The Prince and Princess of Wales and their children were making their entrance, and the coronation ceremony was truly beginning. The walk down the aisle felt endless. Every step was measured, deliberate, and observed. William kept his eyes forward, his face composed but warm. Catherine walked beside him with perfect grace, her training and natural poise evident in every movement. Behind them, the children followed, each one doing their very best to live up to the moment and the expectations placed upon them. The sacred walk the aisle stretched before them like a sacred path through history. On either side, the great and the good of nations stood in respect. Prime ministers, presidents, royalty from across the globe, all had risen to their feet as the Wales family began their entrance. The cameras positioned throughout the abbey captured every angle, every moment, broadcasting the scene to a global audience estimated at over 2 billion people. William felt the weight of every gaze upon him. He had been in the public eye his entire life, but this was different. This was not just any royal event. This was the coronation of his father, and he was processing through Westminster Abbey as the heir to the throne. Every step he took was a step toward his own future as king. The thought was both humbling and terrifying. Beside him, Catherine moved with the grace that had made her one of the most photographed women in the world. She had learned over the years how to carry herself in these moments, how to appear serene and confident even when her heart was racing. She could feel the eyes of the congregation on her, could sense the cameras tracking her every movement, but she kept her focus on the path ahead, on supporting her husband and on being a steady presence for her children. Behind them, George walked with careful precision. Each step was measured, deliberate. He had been taught exactly how to walk in formal processions, how to hold his head, how to move his arms. But knowing what to do and actually doing it in front of billions of people were two very different things. His young heart pounded in his chest, but he kept going, kept following his parents, determined not to let anyone down. Charlotte found herself caught between nervousness and wonder. The abbey was so beautiful, so grand, and all these important people were here to see her grandfather become king. She remembered her mother's instructions to walk slowly, to smile gently, to keep her head up. She focused on these things, trying to do everything perfectly. She could see people watching her, some smiling, and she felt proud to be part of this moment. Louis was doing his best to keep up with his older siblings. The walk seemed very long, and there were so many people looking at them. He wanted to wave like he had done from the car, but his mother had told him this was a more serious time. So he walked as well as he could, holding himself as straight as possible, trying to be grown up even though he was only 5 years old. The organ music swelled, filling every corner of the ancient building. The choir's voices rose in harmony, creating a sound that was both ethereal and powerful. The music had been chosen carefully, pieces that spoke of continuity and change, of tradition and renewal. It set the tone for everything that was happening, lifting the ceremony beyond the ordinary into something transcendent. As they moved forward, William noticed familiar faces in the congregation. Foreign dignitaries he had met on official visits, members of Parliament, representatives from the Commonwealth nations. Each one had come to witness this historic moment. He nodded slightly to some, acknowledging their presence while maintaining the dignity of the procession. Catherine saw representatives from the charities she supported, people she had worked with over the years. She wanted to smile at them, to acknowledge them personally, but she knew this was not the moment for individual recognition. This was about the monarchy as an institution, about continuity and stability. Personal connections would have to wait for another time. The children could see their relatives in the congregation. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all dressed in their finest clothes, all watching the procession with pride and emotion. George caught sight of his Aunt Pippa and Uncle James, and it comforted him to see familiar faces in the crowd. Charlotte spotted her Spencer cousins and wanted to wave but remembered she should not. Louis saw his Uncle Harry and gave a small, involuntary smile before remembering to look serious again. The television cameras captured every detail. Close-ups of the children's faces showed their mixture of emotions, nervousness, pride, and determination. The commentators spoke in hushed, reverent tones about the significance of the moment, about the Wales children representing the future of the monarchy. Millions of viewers watched, captivated by the scene unfolding before them. Halfway down the aisle, William felt his father's presence, even though Charles had not yet entered the Abbey. He thought about their relationship, the years of sometimes difficult interactions, the misunderstandings and reconciliations. But today was about moving beyond all of that. Today was about supporting his father in this momentous step, about showing unity and strength as a family. Catherine thought about her own journey to this moment. From a girl growing up in Berkshire to the future Queen Consort, walking through Westminster Abbey at a coronation. It had been a long road full of challenges and adjustments. She had been scrutinized and criticized, praised and admired. But she had found her place, had learned her role, and now she walked with confidence, representing not just herself but the institution she had married into. The light in the Abbey seemed to shift as they moved forward, the carefully arranged illumination creating dramatic effects. Shafts of sunlight came through the ancient stained glass windows, creating pools of colored light on the stone floor. The flowers seemed to glow in the light and the gold decorations sparkled. Everything had been designed to create a sense of majesty and wonder, and it was working perfectly. George could see the throne area ahead, where the actual coronation would take place. He knew he would have a role to play there, carrying part of his grandfather's ceremonial robes. The thought made his stomach flutter with nerves, but he pushed the feeling away. He had practiced many times. He knew what to do. He would not fail. Charlotte was drinking in every detail, storing memories that she would carry for the rest of her life. The way the light fell on the ancient stones, the sound of the music echoing through the space, the rustle of fabric as people shifted in their seats, the scent of the flowers and the candles. She wanted to remember it all, every single moment of this incredible day. Louis was starting to feel tired. The walk seemed to take forever, and standing still was hard for someone his age. But he could sense that this was important, that everyone was counting on him to do well. So he kept going, putting one foot in front of the other, following his family down the sacred aisle. The congregation remained standing, their attention fixed on the royal family. Some people had tears in their eyes, moved by the historical significance of the moment. Others wore expressions of joy and pride. All of them understood that they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that would be remembered and discussed for generations to come. As they neared their designated seats, William felt a sense of relief beginning to build. They had made it through the procession without any mishaps. The children had been wonderful, conducting themselves with dignity and grace. Catherine had been, as always, his anchor and support. They were almost there, almost to the point where they could sit and watch the rest of the ceremony unfold. The music began to change, signaling the end of their processional. They reached their places, and palace officials quietly guided them into position. The children would sit with their parents for most of the ceremony, except for the moments when George would need to perform his duties as a page. Everything had been choreographed with precision, every movement planned and rehearsed. As they took their seats, William allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. They had done well. The entrance had been everything it needed to be, graceful and dignified, representing the monarchy at its best. Now they would wait for his father to make his entrance, for the ceremony to truly begin, for history to be made before their eyes. Catherine settled the children, making sure they were comfortable. She whispered quiet words of praise to each of them, letting them know how proud she was. They had walked through Westminster Abbey like true royals, and now they would sit and witness their grandfather's coronation. It was a day none of them would ever forget. The congregation began to sit again, a wave of movement and rustling fabric that swept through the abbey. The television cameras adjusted their positions, preparing for the next phase of the ceremony. Outside, the crowds continued to cheer, their excitement undiminished. And inside Westminster Abbey, the Wales family took their places, ready to witness history, ready to support the king, ready to embrace whatever the future might bring. Moments of glory, the moment had arrived. The great doors of Westminster Abbey opened once more, and a hush fell over the congregation. The music shifted to the coronation anthem, powerful and majestic. Every person in the building knew what this meant. King Charles III was about to enter for his coronation, and the ceremony that would define a new era was truly beginning. William felt his breath catch as he watched his father appear in the doorway. Charles was dressed in his crimson velvet robe of state, the heavy fabric trailing behind him. He walked slowly with dignity and purpose, flanked by bishops and accompanied by the ceremonial procession. William had seen his father in many situations over the years, but this was different. This was the culmination of a lifetime of waiting, of preparation, of service. Catherine reached over and gently squeezed William's hand. She could sense the emotion he was feeling, the complexity of watching his father take this historic step. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment they shared an understanding that needed no words. This was family, duty, and history all coming together in the most profound way. The children watched with wide eyes as their grandfather processed down the aisle. George felt his heart rate increase, knowing that soon he would need to step forward and perform his role. Charlotte sat perfectly still, mesmerized by the spectacle. Louis fidgeted slightly but remained quiet, sensing the importance of the moment even if he did not fully understand it. The Archbishop of Canterbury stood waiting at the coronation chair, the ancient seat that had been used for coronations for centuries. The crown jewels were displayed on the altar, each piece representing centuries of tradition and sovereignty. The orb, the scepter, the crown itself, all gleaming under the carefully arranged lighting, all waiting to be placed on the new king. Charles took his place before the Archbishop and the ceremony began in earnest. The recognition came first, with the Archbishop presenting the king to the four corners of the abbey, asking the congregation if they were willing to do homage and service. The response was a resounding affirmation, voices rising together in agreement and support. The oath followed, with Charles pledging to govern according to the laws and customs of the nation, to uphold justice and mercy, to maintain the Church of England. His voice was steady and clear, carrying through the abbey. William listened to every word, knowing that one day he would stand in that same place and make those same vows. The anointing came next, the most sacred part of the ceremony. Screens were brought forward to shield the king from view during this holy moment. The Archbishop poured the holy oil, blessed for this very purpose, and anointed Charles on his hands, breast, and head. This was the moment that truly set him apart, the moment when the spiritual dimension of kingship was acknowledged and consecrated. When the screens were removed, Charles was dressed in his coronation robes, magnificent garments of gold cloth, heavy with symbolism and history. It was at this point that George knew his moment had come. An official appeared beside him and quietly gestured for him to come forward. Catherine gave her son's hand a final reassuring squeeze, and George stood up. Every eye in the abbey turned to watch the young prince. He walked forward with careful steps, his young face serious with concentration. He was one of 4 pages, each assigned to hold a corner of the king's robe. George took his position, his small hands grasping the heavy fabric. He could feel the weight of it, could sense the centuries of tradition it represented. The camera zoomed in on George, broadcasting his nervous but determined face to billions of viewers. Social media erupted with comments about how brave he looked, how grown up, how perfectly he was performing his duty. His parents watched with pride and concern, willing him to do well, supporting him from their seats even though they could not physically be beside him. The investiture began, with each of the royal regalia being presented and placed upon the king. The spurs, the sword, the armils, each item came with prayers and explanations of its significance. George held the robe steady, never letting it slip, never allowing his attention to waver. He was doing his job, and he was doing it well. The orb was placed in the king's right hand, symbolizing Christian sovereignty over the world. Then came the ring, representing the marriage between the monarch and the nation. The scepter followed, representing temporal power and authority. Each item was presented with ceremony and prayer. Each carried weight far beyond its physical presence. And then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The crown. St. Edward's crown, used only for coronations, heavy with gold and jewels, rich with history and significance. The archbishop lifted it carefully, holding it high so all could see. The congregation held its collective breath. The organ fell silent. In that moment of perfect stillness, the crown was lowered onto Charles's head. The moment it touched his head, everything changed. The organ burst forth with triumphant music. Trumpets sounded from every corner of the abbey. The congregation rose as one, crying out in acclamation. Outside, gun salutes fired in salute, the sound echoing across London. Church bells began to ring throughout the city, throughout the nation, celebrating the moment. King Charles III had been crowned. William felt tears prick his eyes as he watched his father receive the crown. All the complicated feelings he had about their relationship, all the years of preparation and waiting, all culminated in this moment. His father was king, and he was now formally the heir to a crowned monarch. The future had suddenly become more real, more immediate. Catherine watched her husband's face and understood everything he was feeling. She reached for his hand again, offering silent support. She looked at George, still standing bravely in his position, and felt overwhelming pride. Her 9-year-old son was helping to crown his grandfather, participating in history. It was an extraordinary moment for their family. Charlotte was captivated by the crown. It sparkled and gleamed under the lights, looking just like something from a fairy tale. But this was real. This was her grandfather, and this was actually happening. She wanted to remember every detail, wanted to be able to tell her friends at school about what she had seen, though she knew they would barely believe her. Louis had perked up at the loud music and the excitement. He understood that something very important had just happened, even if he was not quite sure what. He looked at his parents and saw his father wiping his eyes, saw his mother smiling with pride and emotion. He felt the energy in the room and knew this was a special moment. The homage followed, with William being the first to pay his respects to the newly crowned king. He walked forward, his movements precise and practiced, and knelt before his father. In a clear voice, he pledged his loyalty and service, his faith and truth. Charles placed his hands on William's head in blessing, and father and son exchanged a look filled with emotion and understanding. George was finally able to step back, his duty completed. He returned to his seat on slightly shaking legs, exhausted from the concentration and tension. Catherine immediately wrapped an arm around him, whispering how wonderful he had been, how proud everyone was of him. George leaned into his mother's embrace, relieved to have his part over with, but also proud of what he had accomplished. The ceremony continued with prayers and blessings, with music and celebration. The newly crowned king sat on his throne, the crown upon his head, the scepter in his hand, the very picture of majesty and sovereignty. Representatives from the Commonwealth came forward to offer their respects and recognition. Religious leaders from various faiths offered blessings and prayers, reflecting the diverse nature of modern Britain. The Queen Consort received her own crown during a quieter moment in the ceremony, a smaller but still significant crown that recognized her position and role. Camilla had traveled her own difficult path to reach this moment, and now she sat beside Charles, both of them crowned, both of them ready to serve in their new roles. As the ceremony drew toward its conclusion, the atmosphere in the abbey was one of joy and celebration, mixed with reverence and awe. History had been made, tradition upheld, and a new chapter begun. The Wales family sat together, having played their part in this historic day, having witnessed something that would be remembered for generations to come. The coronation was almost complete, but the memories being created would last forever. A kingdom celebrates. The ceremony concluded with a great recessional, the newly crowned king and queen leading the way out of Westminster Abbey. The music swelled to a triumphant finale, filling every corner of the ancient building with sound. The congregation stood once more, watching as the royal couple made their way back down the aisle, this time wearing their crowns, carrying the symbols of their new authority. William and Catherine waited for their turn to process out, gathering the children as they prepared to follow the king and queen. George looked exhausted but happy, the tension of his duties finally releasing. Charlotte was still bright-eyed with excitement, not wanting the day to end. Louis was ready to move, tired of sitting still for so long. When their moment came, the family stood and joined the procession. This time the walk back felt different. They had arrived with anticipation and nerves. Now they departed with relief and joy, having witnessed and participated in history. The eyes of the world were still upon them, but the most difficult part was over. As they emerged from the abbey into the daylight, the roar of the crowd was overwhelming. Thousands upon thousands of people had waited for hours to see this moment. The sight of the newly crowned king and queen, followed by the Prince and Princess of Wales and their children, brought forth a wave of cheering and celebration that seemed to shake the very foundations of the historic buildings surrounding them. The family made their way to the waiting carriages. The king and queen would ride in the gold state coach, a magnificent vehicle that had been used for coronations for over 2 centuries. William and Catherine, with their children, would follow in another state carriage, part of the grand procession back to Buckingham Palace. The route had been carefully planned to allow as many people as possible to see the newly crowned monarch. Every street along the way was packed with spectators. Union Jack flags waved everywhere, creating a sea of red, white, and blue. People stood on tiptoes, held children on shoulders, leaned out of windows, all straining for a glimpse of the royal family. Inside their carriage, the Wales children pressed against the windows, amazed by the sheer number of people. Louis was waving enthusiastically now, his earlier requirement to be serious forgotten in the excitement of the moment. Charlotte waved too, more gracefully, remembering her mother's lessons about royal waves. George, tired but proud, managed a smile and a wave, feeling a sense of accomplishment after completing his important role. William and Catherine exchanged glances of relief and happiness. They had made it through. The day had gone smoothly, the children had been wonderful, and the ceremony had been everything it needed to be. Now came the more relaxed part, the celebration, the balcony appearance, and eventually, the privacy of family time away from the cameras. The procession moved slowly through the crowded streets. Military bands played stirring music. Soldiers in ceremonial uniform marched with precision. Mounted cavalry rode alongside the carriages, their horses perfectly trained and beautifully turned out. The whole spectacle was designed to showcase British pageantry at its finest, and it was working perfectly. People in the crowd shouted congratulations, waved flags, took photographs and videos. Many had tears streaming down their faces, moved by the historic nature of the occasion. Some had traveled from distant parts of the Commonwealth to be here, wanting to be part of this moment. The diversity of the crowd reflected the modern, multicultural Britain that Charles would now rule over as king. Television helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting aerial views of the procession to viewers around the globe. The images were spectacular, showing the full scale of the celebration. The crowd stretching as far as the eye could see, the grand carriages making their stately progress through the heart of London. As they approached Buckingham Palace, the crowds became even denser. The area around the palace had been filled since early morning with people hoping to secure a spot for the balcony appearance. The palace itself looked magnificent, decorated with flags and banners, ready to host the celebration that would follow. The carriages passed through the palace gates, and the family finally had a moment of privacy. Inside the palace, the staff members were waiting to help them prepare for the next phase of the day. The children were given refreshments and a chance to rest briefly. George was told repeatedly how well he had done, how proud everyone was of him. He beamed with pleasure at the praise. But there was little time to rest. The crowds outside were calling for the balcony appearance, a tradition that dated back over a century. The newly crowned king and queen, along with the close members of the royal family, would step out onto the famous balcony to wave to the crowd and acknowledge their support and celebration. Catherine checked the children one more time, making sure they looked presentable. Hair was smoothed, clothes were straightened, faces were wiped clean. This would be another moment captured by thousands of cameras, another image that would appear on front pages around the world. Everything had to be perfect. The family gathered with the king and queen in the room behind the balcony. Charles still wore his crown, though it would soon be removed and placed back with the crown jewels. Camilla looked radiant, the emotion of the day evident on her face. The atmosphere was one of joy and relief. The difficult parts over, only celebration remaining. The doors to the balcony opened and the roar of the crowd intensified. Charles and Camilla stepped out first, and the volume of the cheering became almost painful. Hundreds of thousands of people had gathered in front of the palace, filling the mall and all the surrounding areas. It was an ocean of people, all celebrating, all wanting to be part of this historic moment. William and Catherine followed with the children, and the crowd's enthusiasm reached new heights. The children waved enthusiastically, no longer needing to maintain the formal composure required during the ceremony. Charlotte was beaming, loving every moment of the attention. George waved more shyly but with genuine pleasure. Louis bounced up and down with excitement, waving with both hands. The Royal Air Force had planned a fly-past for this moment, and right on schedule, the sound of approaching aircraft could be heard. The crowd looked up as formation after formation of planes flew over the palace, trailing colored smoke, creating patterns in the sky. It was a spectacular display, a fitting tribute to the newly crowned king. The family stood together on the balcony, waving to the crowd, watching the fly-past, soaking in the atmosphere of celebration and unity. This was what the monarchy was meant to represent: continuity and stability, tradition and service. And today, with the whole world watching, they had shown that the institution could still inspire and unite. Catherine looked at her children, at her husband, at the king and queen, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. They had made it through this historic day. The children had been wonderful. The ceremony had been beautiful. And now, standing on this famous balcony with the crowd cheering below, she felt part of something much bigger than herself. William stood tall, his arm around his father's shoulder in a brief, spontaneous gesture of support and affection. Whatever differences they might have had in the past seemed to fade in the light of this extraordinary day. They were family, they were royalty, and they had just witnessed and participated in one of the most significant events in the nation's history. The balcony appearance lasted for several minutes, with the family waving and acknowledging the crowd. Then, with a final wave, they turned and went back inside. The public part of the day was essentially over. There would be a private reception later, a family dinner, a chance to finally relax and reflect on everything that had happened. As they walked back through the palace corridors, the children chattering excitedly about everything they had seen and done, Catherine and William shared a quiet moment. They had played their part in history today. Their children had witnessed something they would remember for the rest of their lives. And the monarchy, that ancient institution, had moved forward into a new era with dignity, grace, and hope for the future. Evening reflections. As evening fell over London, the celebrations continued across the city. Street parties were in full swing. Fireworks lit up the sky and the pubs were filled with people toasting the new king. But inside Buckingham Palace, a different kind of celebration was taking place. The Wales family had retreated to their private apartments, finally able to shed the formal attire and the public personas. The children were already in comfortable clothes, their formal outfits carefully put away by palace staff. George had been given permission to keep the page's badge as a memento, and he held it carefully, turning it over in his hands as he relived the day's events. Charlotte was telling anyone who would listen about every detail she had noticed, her words tumbling over each other in excitement. Louis had already fallen asleep on the sofa, exhausted by the long and overwhelming day. William stood by the window looking out over the city. He could still hear the distant sounds of celebration, could see lights twinkling across London. His father was now king, officially crowned and anointed. The reality of it was still sinking in. Everything had changed today, even though in many ways everything would continue much as before. Catherine joined him at the window, slipping her hand into his. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the extraordinary day they had just experienced. She could see the weight of responsibility settling more firmly on her husband's shoulders. He was no longer just the heir to the throne. He was now the heir to a crowned monarch, And that brought with it a new level of expectation and scrutiny. They had been invited to join the king and queen for a private family dinner, but it would not be for another hour. For now they had this precious time with their children, time to decompress and reflect on the day's events without cameras or crowds or protocol officers watching their every move. George came to sit with his parents, still clutching his badge. William put an arm around his son, pulling him close. He was so proud of how George had handled the pressure and responsibility. 9 years old and already performing royal duties in front of billions of people. William remembered his own childhood, the gradual introduction to public life, and he hoped he and Catherine were managing to give their children the right balance of normal childhood and royal training. George looked up at his father and asked the question that had been on his mind all day. What would happen now? Would everything be different? Would grandfather change now that he was king? William smiled and ruffled his son's hair. He explained that grandfather would have more responsibilities now, more duties and obligations. But he was still the same person, still loved them all just as much. Charlotte wandered over, not wanting to be left out of the conversation. She had questions too. When would she get to wear a crown? Could she be a page at the next coronation? Catherine gently explained that there would not be another coronation for a very long time, hopefully not until Charlotte was much older. But there would be other special occasions, other moments when she would get to dress up and be part of history. William looked at his daughter and saw so much of his mother in her. Diana had loved the glamour and spectacle of royal life, even when she struggled with the restrictions and pressures. He hoped Charlotte would find a way to enjoy the privileges of her position while staying grounded and focused on what really mattered, service and duty. Catherine went to check on Louis, who was still sleeping soundly. She gently brushed the hair from his forehead, marveling at how peaceful he looked. He had been so good today, so patient considering his age. She knew the day had been confusing and overwhelming for him, but he had tried his best, and that was all anyone could ask. A palace official knocked quietly and informed them that dinner would be ready in 30 minutes. Catherine nodded and began to gather the children. Louis would need to be woken up, though he would probably be grumpy about it. George and Charlotte needed to change into something more appropriate for dinner with the king and queen, even if it was just family. As they prepared to go down for dinner, William took a moment to think about what the day had meant. History had been made, tradition upheld, and the monarchy had moved forward. His father had waited longer than any heir in British history to become king, and now he finally wore the crown. It was a profound moment, and William felt the weight of his own future pressing more heavily upon him. But for now, he pushed those thoughts aside. Tonight was about celebration, about family, about acknowledging what they had all achieved together. There would be time enough later to think about the future, about his own eventual coronation, about preparing George for the role he would one day inherit. Tonight was for being together, for being a family, for enjoying this historic moment. The family made their way through the palace corridors to the private dining room where the king and queen were waiting. Charles had finally removed the crown, though he still wore his formal dinner attire. Camilla had changed into a more comfortable evening gown but still looked every inch a queen. They both smiled warmly as the Wales family entered. The dinner was relaxed despite the formal setting. The children were animated, telling their grandparents about everything they had seen and thought during the day. Charles listened with genuine interest, asking questions, praising George for his role as page, telling Charlotte how beautiful she had looked, and making Louis laugh with silly jokes. William watched his father interact with the children and felt a complex mixture of emotions. Charles had not always been the most present father when William was growing up, too focused on his duties and interests. But he was a devoted grandfather, making time for the children, showing them affection and attention. Perhaps that was part of growing older, understanding what really mattered. Catherine and Camilla talked quietly at one end of the table, discussing the day's events, sharing observations about the ceremony and the crowds. They had both traveled difficult paths to reach their current positions. Both faced criticism and scrutiny. Both learned to navigate the complex world of royal life. There was understanding and mutual respect between them, forged through shared experience. As the meal progressed, Charles raised his glass in a toast. He thanked everyone for their support during the day, acknowledged William and Catherine for the grace and dignity they had shown, and praised the children for their excellent behavior. He spoke about the future with hope and determination, about serving the nation and the Commonwealth with dedication and care. William responded with his own toast, congratulating his father on the coronation, pledging his support and loyalty, and expressing confidence in the reign that was now beginning. It was a moment of unity and understanding between father and son, setting aside past difficulties in favor of shared purpose and mutual respect. After dinner, the family moved to a more comfortable sitting room. The children were allowed to stay up a bit later than usual, given the special nature of the day. They sat with their parents and grandparents, watching highlights of the coronation on television, seeing themselves processed through the abbey, seeing the moment when the crown was placed on Charles's head. Charlotte gasped when she saw herself on screen, amazed at how the cameras had captured every detail. George watched his role as page with critical eyes, relieved to see that he had done everything correctly. Louis pointed excitedly at every appearance of himself, laughing at how serious he looked in some shots. As the evening wore on, the children began to tire again. Catherine and William knew it was time to take them back to their apartments and put them to bed. They said their good nights to the king and queen, the children giving sleepy hugs and kisses before being led away. Back in their private rooms, the children were quickly settled into bed. George fell asleep clutching his page's badge, dreaming of crowns and processions. Charlotte whispered to her mother that she wanted to be a queen someday, making Catherine smile with both amusement and a touch of sadness for the life Charlotte might one day lead. Louis was asleep before his head hit the pillow, exhausted by the longest and most exciting day of his young life. William and Catherine finally had a moment alone together. They sat quietly in their sitting room, the sounds of celebration from the city still faintly audible. They did not need to talk much. They understood what each other was feeling, the mixture of pride, exhaustion, relief, and anticipation for what lay ahead. Catherine thought about the journey that had brought her to this point. From a girl growing up in Berkshire to the future queen consort, it had been an extraordinary path. Today she had walked through Westminster Abbey with her family, had watched her son play a role in crowning a king, had stood on the balcony of Buckingham Palace while hundreds of thousands cheered. It was surreal, overwhelming, and humbling all at once. William looked at his wife and felt grateful for her presence in his life. She had been his rock, his support, his partner through everything. Without her, he was not sure he could have managed the pressures and expectations of his position. Together they had built a strong family, raised wonderful children, and prepared themselves for the roles they would one day assume. The coronation was over, but in many ways it was just the beginning. A new reign had started, bringing with it new challenges and opportunities. The Wales family had played their